When my daughter screamed, "You will either serve my husband or get out of my house," something inside me shifted, but not in the way she expected. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I didn't plead. I simply smiled, slow, steady, and picked up the same suitcase I had once brought home after burying her mother. Without another word, I stepped out of the house I had poured my entire life into. The very foundation of that home had been laid with my sweat, my sacrifice, and every unspoken dream I once carried for her future. She stood in the hallway, arms folded, expecting me to collapse like I always did. But this time I didn't break. This time I walked away. A week passed. 22 missed calls blinked on my phone screen, her name again and again. And that was only the beginning. You see, I've spent a lifetime being underestimated. Quiet, patient, keen, but never weak. They were about to learn that the hard way. Before I tell you what happened next, take a second to subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. What comes next isn't just a story, it's the calm before the storm. The keys were still warm in my palm when I unlocked the front door. Grocery bags dug into my wrists, leaving deep red lines that throbbed with every heartbeat. The soft golden light of Saturday afternoon streamed through the curtains, wrapping the living room in a springtime glow that would have once filled me with peace. But not today. Not anymore. Harry, my son-in-law, was sprawled out like a king on my leather recliner. That chair had once been sacred. My wife Martha gave it to me for my 60th birthday, just months before the cancer came for her. She used to call it my thinking chair. Now it was defiled by his slouched body, beer in hand, socks off, remote perched on his gut like a crown of entitlement. "Grab me another beer while you're up," he said, not even sparing me a glance from the basketball game. I set the grocery bags down carefully, feeling the ache in my joints, the sting of plastic handles embedded in my hands. "Excuse me?" I asked calmly. "You heard me," he said, his eyes never leaving the screen. "Corona, not that discount garbage you usually drink." A cold chill slid down my spine. I'd bought those Coronas for him. Used my Social Security money I needed for medication, not beer, for him. For peace, for the sake of my daughter. "Harry," I said slowly, "I just walked in. I need to put the groceries away." Now he looked at me, that face, so full of lazy arrogance, so used to getting his way, twisted into that same familiar smirk, the one that said I was the problem, that I was being difficult. "What's the big deal? You're already standing," he said, his tone dismissive. "I'm comfortable." That was the final crack in the dam. "The big deal," I said, my voice low but clear, "is that this is my house." His feet dropped to the floor with a dull thud. He stood slowly, looming over me like a bully on a playground. At 30, he had the advantage, taller, stronger, but I'd seen men twice his size break under pressure. I'd buried friends. I'd held my wife's hand through her final breath. He had no idea what kind of storm I could be. "Your house?" he scoffed. "Funny, we live here, we pay the bills now, with my money." He stepped in close, breath sour with beer, eyes sharp with threat. "Look, Clark, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. You want to stay here? Then play ball. It's that simple." That's when Tiffany entered, my daughter, the same girl I'd once carried home from the hospital, swaddled in a blanket I couldn't afford. Her blonde hair was tied back in a messy ponytail. A dish towel hung from her hands. She froze in the kitchen doorway, eyes flicking between Harry and me. She could feel it too, the pressure in the air, like thunder building just beyond the clouds. This was the moment everything changed. And trust me, they had no idea what he was coming next. "What's going on?" Tiffany's voice cut through the room like a blade. That familiar edge was back, the same one she used to wield as a teenager when she thought the world owed her answers. Only this time it wasn't rebellion. It was accusation. It was warning. Harry didn't even glance in her direction. "Your father's being difficult," he said, his voice soaked in condescension. His eyes stayed locked on me, never blinking. I asked him to grab me a beer, and now he's turning it into some kind of federal investigation. Tiffany turned to me with a look that twisted my stomach. Not concern, not confusion, disappointment, like I was a child acting out in front of company. "Dad," she said, crossing her arms, "just get him the beer. It's not worth fighting over." Not worth it? Not worth the years I spent sacrificing for her? The nights I went without so she could have enough? The job I held for 37 years until my back gave out and the doctor said enough was enough? But Harry wasn't finished. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, until the stench of cheap beer filled the air between us. "See, Clark," he said, as if explaining something to a confused old man. "Here's how it's gonna work. You live in our house now. You want to stay? Then you contribute. That means when I ask for something, you do it. No questions, no attitude." Our house. I kept my voice calm, even though my chest was tight and my hands were trembling. Rage or heartbreak, I wasn't sure. "That's right," Tiffany added, stepping up beside him. "Two against one now, a united front." "Dad," she said more firmly, "you need to decide. Right now. Either you help Harry and do what he asks, or you can pack your things and leave." The room was quiet, so quiet I could hear the soft creak of the ceiling fan overhead and the faint ticking of the wall clock. Martha once insisted we hang. Her absence was louder than anything else. I looked at Tiffany, truly looked. Not at her clothes or her expression, but deeper, searching for a flicker of the little girl who used to run to me during thunderstorms, her tiny hands gripping my shirt as she whispered, "Don't let go, Daddy." But that girl was gone. In her place stood someone else, someone I didn't recognize. She wore Harry's arrogance like perfume, and she looked at me not like a daughter, but like a tenant annoyed at her landlord. "All right," I said softly. Harry smirked, that smug, lazy curl of the lip. He thought he'd won. "Good. Now, about that beer." "I'll pack." Silence. The smirk froze. Tiffany's jaw dropped slightly, just a little flicker of disbelief, as if she expected me to back down, to mumble an apology, to shuffle to the fridge like a beaten man clinging to dignity. But I wasn't broken. Not today. I turned without another word and walked toward the hallway. Behind me, the grocery bags still sat untouched. Bread, milk, eggs, things I'd bought not just for myself, but for them. And yet they hadn't lifted a single finger. I heard Harry's sharp breath, like he'd just realized he'd pushed too far. Tiffany whispered, "Dad, wait." But her voice had lost its power. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors Martha and I had refinished with our own hands 20 years ago. I could still picture her kneeling there in old jeans and a paint-stained t-shirt, laughing as she spilled varnish on her shoes. Every inch of that floor held a memory. In my bedroom, I reached up into the closet. The suitcase came down with a soft thump, a familiar sound, familiar weight. I'd bought it for our honeymoon to Yellowstone, back when we still believed we had forever. I unzipped it and laid it open on the bed. It looked emptier than I remembered. No, I was emptier than I remembered. I packed slowly, carefully, underwear, socks, 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, not everything, just what I needed. Not fleeing, just moving on. In the living room, I heard hushed voices, urgent, panicked. Harry's harsh tone broke through every now and then, his frustration bleeding into the air. Tiffany's voice was softer, more frantic. But I didn't rush. I had all the time in the world. Because for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't staying for anyone. They were whispering in the living room, probably weighing their options, figuring out how to handle the old man's unexpected rebellion. They hadn't anticipated resistance, not from me. But as they scrambled to control the narrative, my hands moved with quiet precision, muscle memory guiding every motion. Folding shirts, rolling ties, socks tucked neatly beside undershirts. My toothbrush slipped into the side pocket with a soft click of the zipper. I paused at the dresser. A photo of Martha rested against the mirror, our anniversary trip to the coast. She was laughing, her hair caught in the wind, sun in her eyes. I wrapped the frame gently in tissue paper and placed it inside the suitcase like it was made of glass. Then went the little bottle of pills I took every morning, my reading glasses, the worn leather journal where I still tracked every cent that passed through my hands, A habit from the bank I never shook. When I wheeled the suitcase down the hall, the whispers died instantly. Harry was back in his chair, but he wasn't lounging now. No slouch, no arrogance. He sat upright, alert, like a guard dog watching a stranger too closely. Tiffany stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, jaw tight. She tried to look stern, tried to pretend like she still had control of the situation. But she didn't, and she knew it. Neither of them said goodbye. Not a word, no apology, no hesitation, just silence. The door shut behind me with a soft click. Final and clean. My old Buick, bless her, roared to life on the first turn of the key. She always came through when I needed her most. I backed out of the driveway without glancing in the rearview mirror. I didn't care if they were watching from the window or already arguing about who would get the guest room now. Let them watch me go. Or don't. It no longer mattered. The 30-minute drive to Pine Lodge rolled by in silence, except for the soft hum of the engine and the occasional whisper of wind against the windows. But inside my mind, the past played on loop. Downtown Kalispell looked the same. Small shops, red brick buildings, familiar corners that once felt like home. But nothing felt familiar today. $40,000 a year. That's what her private college had cost. A fancy university she insisted on, with ivy-covered walls and professors who used words she'd never heard before. 4 years of overtime at the bank, weekends spent combing through loan files. My hands cramped just remembering it. Signatures, approvals, cross-checks. I did it all. Quietly. For her. Then the wedding, 25 grand. Harry's family couldn't pay their share, and I'd swallowed the cost like I swallowed everything else, with a smile in silence. Didn't want to embarrass anyone, least of all my daughter. Reception hall, designer gown, champagne that cost more per bottle than I'd spent on my entire honeymoon. Then came the house. They needed help, of course. Young couples always do. $80,000 from my retirement savings just for the down payment. It's what fathers do, I told myself. It's what Martha would have wanted. And then the slow bleed began. $1,200 for the mortgage, $300 for utilities, $500 for groceries, because things got tight. Month after month, my Social Security check disappeared into their lives, quietly funding the very world that eventually turned against me. And I let it happen. I told myself it was love. But love doesn't come with ultimatums. Love doesn't throw you out of your own home for refusing to fetch a beer. Pine Lodge Motel sat just off the highway, nestled between a shuttered diner and a gas station that hadn't changed its prices in 6 years. The paint on the siding was peeling. The neon sign buzzed and flickered like it was trying to die, but couldn't. Room 6 was small. A bed, a single chair, a rickety table near the window that looked out over a gravel parking lot. It smelled faintly of lemon-scented cleaner and old memories. I set my suitcase on the luggage rack and sat on the edge of the mattress. It dipped beneath my weight, the springs groaning softly. The silence here was different. Not peaceful like the quiet Martha and I once shared reading books side by side. This silence felt hollow, temporary. The sound of something gone, not something resting. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen for a moment before I opened the contacts list. The names blurred a little. Some people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old coworkers, a fishing buddy I lost touch with, a cousin in Missoula who always said I could visit anytime. I scrolled slowly, because tonight, for the first time in a very long time, I was deciding who deserved to hear from me and who didn't. Bank numbers, insurance companies, credit card services, a catalog of institutions that had once been just part of the job, digits and deadlines and decimal points. But now they were the first tools in reclaiming a life I had quietly let slip through my fingers. 30 years in finance had given me more than just a pension and a good reputation. It had given me knowledge, practical, precise, and now dangerously personal. It was Saturday night, and I knew tomorrow was Sunday. Banks would be mostly closed, offices quiet, but not everything slept on Sundays. Systems ran, numbers moved, and some decisions didn't need to wait. I opened the laptop on the small motel table, the hum of its fan loud in the silence of that dimly lit room. The login screen greeted me like an old friend. A few keystrokes later, my account balances illuminated the screen. Checking, savings, retirement. Figures that represented a lifetime of careful planning. Not wealth, but discipline. All the little things I denied myself over the years. Dinners out, vacations, upgrades, even hobbies. So I could make sure they were taken care of. So my daughter could have a better life than I did. So Harry could play husband while I played silent sponsor. The cursor blinked in the search bar, waiting, just like I had, for far too long. Sunday morning came cloaked in gray clouds, the sky heavy with quiet disapproval. It fit my mood like a tailored suit. I brewed motel coffee, thin, bitter, and laid my paperwork across the tiny round table like a general unfurling maps before a battle. Bank statements, insurance policies, legal documents, neatly organized, easily accessible. The first call was to First National Bank. Most people didn't know that automated systems still ran on Sundays. I did. That's why I navigated the phone tree with the ease of a man who had built them. After a few layers of robotic prompts, a live voice finally answered. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," the representative said, chipper and unaware of the significance this call carried. "How can I help you today?" "I need to cancel the automatic mortgage payment for 847 Pine Street," I said. Calm, controlled. Count ending in 4729. A pause, the sound of keyboard keys clicking in the background, checking what no doubt looked like a generous, uninterrupted 5-year payment history. "Sir," the rep said carefully, "I see that payment has been active for quite some time. Are you sure you want to discontinue it?" "Completely sure." "May I ask the reason for the change?" "The homeowners," I replied, voice like iron, "no longer qualify for my financial assistance." More clicking. "I understand the automatic payment has been canceled, effective immediately. You should receive written confirmation within 3 business days. 3 business days to end 5 years of quiet enabling. It was a good start. The second call was easier. Geico had been carrying policies for both their vehicles, Harry's Silverado, Tiffany's Honda, for the past 3 years. Both under my name, both coming out of my account. $280 a month for cars I never drove. Accidents I'd never cause. A pleasant-sounding agent greeted me after a short hold. "How can I help you today?" "I need to remove 2 vehicles from my policy," I said, "effective today. My daughter and son-in-law will need to establish their own coverage." Another pause. "Understood, Mr. Miller. We'll process that right away." 2 more invisible chains snapped off my back. Credit cards were trickier. Tiffany was an authorized user on 3 of my accounts. Visa, MasterCard, and even the Costco store card. A few hundred here, a few hundred there. $500 each month disappearing on charges I never made. Fancy makeup, electronics, online orders that arrived in boxes I never opened. "Mr. Miller," the Visa representative said, "removing an authorized user will block them from making new purchases, but any existing balances will remain your responsibility." "I understand," I said without hesitation. "Remove them immediately." Each call was like peeling off a layer of guilt, of expectation, of disappointment. I knew the systems, knew how to say things just right, knew how to make it all airtight, permanent, clean. No yelling, no revenge, no drama, just precise, legal withdrawal. The life insurance would take longer. It required written documentation and verification, but I began that process too. The paperwork was already half filled out by the time I finished my 3rd cup of coffee. Methodical, measured, decisive, and with every click, every confirmation number, every polite "thank you for calling," I could feel it. The weight lifting. 30 years in finance had taught me the difference between assets and liabilities. It was time my life reflected that. $100,000. That's what I'd intended to leave behind for Tiffany. A safety net, a final act of love, a father's quiet way of saying, "I'll still take care of you, even after I'm gone." Money earned over decades of skipped vacations, worn-out shoes, and silent sacrifices. But family meant something different now. It wasn't DNA, it wasn't debt, it was respect. And they had buried that long ago under entitlement and expectation. By noon, I'd made 8 phone calls. Mortgage payments, canceled, car insurance, terminated, credit cards, blocked, suspended, locked down. The slow, quiet bleed of automatic transfers, the ones that had drained my accounts for years while I convinced myself it was love, stopped with polite conversations and confirmation numbers. I sat back in the motel chair, cheap, plastic, with a cushion that barely held its shape, and stared at the legal pad in front of me. Lines of ink recorded my freedom. Confirmation numbers, reference codes, effective dates, a paper trail of liberation, built with the tools I'd once used to build someone else's life. My phone sat silent on the table beside me. No missed calls, no urgent texts, no groveling voicemails. They didn't know yet. Probably wouldn't know until reality knocked. When the first mortgage payment bounced, when the bank sent the final notice, when bills started arriving in their names instead of mine. But they'd know soon enough. I closed the laptop, stood, and walked to the motel window. Across the parking lot, I watched an elderly man load suitcases into the bed of a pickup truck. His wife stood beside him, giving soft instructions with the kind of grace that only comes from a lifetime of partnership. They didn't argue. They didn't shout. They moved like parts of the same machine, oiled by time, seasoned by storms. Martha and I had been like that once. My phone buzzed against the table, interrupting the memory. Unknown number. I let it ring. The week passed in quiet contrast to the chaos I knew was unfolding miles away. I found rhythm in the simple. Coffee in the motel lobby. Breakfast at the diner 2 blocks down. Eggs over easy. Toast, black coffee. Long walks through Kalispell's quiet streets, past trimmed lawns and porch swings, where people still waved to strangers and dogs barked from behind white picket fences. My phone began collecting missed calls like stamps, neatly stacked, entirely unwanted. By Wednesday, 12. By Friday, 22. That night, I sat at the motel desk and listened to each one in order. Not because I cared, because I was curious. I wanted to hear it, the unraveling. The first messages were calm, almost casual. Tiffany, hey Dad, just wondering if something weird happened with the mortgage payment this month? Maybe a bank glitch? Harry, Clark, the insurance company says our policy's inactive. Can you check on that? Then came the next wave. The worry was subtle, but it was there. Tiffany, Dad, seriously, the payment didn't go through again. I called the bank. They said it was canceled by you. What's going on? Then panic, tears in her voice. Tiffany, they're threatening foreclosure. The whole payment, Dad. They want everything by Friday. I don't have that kind of money. Why would you do this? Then Harry's voice, angrier, louder, predictable. Harry, Clark, this is ridiculous. I've got people breathing down my neck asking why my car's uninsured. You're making us look like deadbeats. You need to fix this now. By Thursday, desperation began to sour into something else. Tiffany was crying openly in her messages, bargaining now. Please, Dad, please just call me. We can figure it out. I know things got tense, but we're still family, right? I didn't mean what I said. Neither did Harry. Please, we'll fix it. Just come home. Then Harry's tone changed too. Not anger, damage control. Clark, look, maybe I was out of line. Maybe I pushed too hard, but we can make it right. Let's just sit down man to man. I'm willing to meet halfway. Halfway, after 5 years of walking the whole road alone, each message ended the same way. A beep, a deletion, no emotion, just a lightness I hadn't felt in years. Thursday morning, a knock at my motel room door. I looked through the peephole. Tiffany. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, sweater wrinkled, face pale. Harry beside her in his work clothes, jaw clenched, shoulders tight. They both looked like they hadn't slept in days. I opened the door, but didn't step aside. Dad, Tiffany's voice cracked as soon as she spoke. Her eyes were red, rimmed with exhaustion and regret. We need to talk. About what? I asked evenly. Before she could speak, Harry pushed forward, his voice already rising. His face was flushed, not just with anger, but with shame, embarrassment, desperation. What the hell are you doing, Clark? He snapped. You think this is funny? Leaving us high and dry like this? You're ruining everything. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. Instead, I looked Harry square in the eye and said calmly, "No, son, I'm just finally stopping. About the fact that you're trying to ruin our lives over some stupid argument about beer?" Harry's voice was sharp, his eyes full of fire. "I'm not trying to ruin anything," I said, steady and calm. "I'm simply no longer paying for your lives." "The mortgage, Clark." Harry's voice rose. "You can't just stop paying the mortgage. That's our house." I shook my head. "Actually, it's my house. My name on the deed. My signature on the loan. You two were just guests." Tiffany reached for Harry's arm, trying to calm him. "Dad, please. We can work this out. Harry was wrong to talk to you that way. We both were, but you can't just leave us like this. No warning, no discussion." I met her eyes without flinching. "You gave me an ultimatum, Tiffany. Do what Harry says or get out." Those were your exact words. "I didn't mean it like that." "Yes, you did." I looked at her, not as my daughter, but as the stranger she'd become. "You just didn't expect me to choose option 2. Harry's tone softened, but it was the kind of softness that masks desperation. "Look, we all said things we didn't mean, but you're talking about our home, our credit, our whole lives. You can't just pull the rug out like this." "I can, and I did." I stepped toward the door. "You wanted me gone. I left. You wanted to handle your own lives. Now you can." Tiffany's voice cracked. "Dad, wait. What about family? What about everything we've been through together?" I paused just for a moment. I saw a flicker of the little girl who once helped me rake leaves, who picked dandelions and proudly gave them to me like bouquets of gold. But that little girl was gone. She'd grown into someone who stood silently while her husband humiliated her father in his own home. "Family works both ways, sweetheart," I said quietly. "I spent 5 years taking care of you both. When it was time to take care of me, you chose him instead." Harry couldn't hide it anymore. The mask slipped. "You crazy old bastard. I can call the police if you raise your voice, Skinwine," I said, sharp now. "This is private property. You're disturbing the peace." They stared at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. Not as the soft-hearted father, not as the walking, talking bank account. Just a man who'd finally learned how to say no. Harry grabbed Tiffany's elbow. "Come on, we'll figure this out ourselves." They walked back to their car. Harry's cocky swagger was gone, replaced by a slumped, anxious gait. Tiffany looked back at me over her shoulder, as if unsure who I really was anymore. I watched them drive away, then quietly shut the door. Back at the table, my laptop waited. There were still calls to make, still accounts to close. The work of dismantling a relationship doesn't end with a confrontation. It ends with silence and follow-through. But first, I needed coffee and clarity. The diner on Main Street had always been a refuge when Martha was alive. Today, it would be again. She used to meet me there after her doctor appointments. We'd sit in our usual booth, share a slice of apple pie, and talk about nothing important. What the neighbors were planting, who'd finally paved their driveway. It never mattered. The conversation was just an excuse to sit together. Tuesday morning found me walking those familiar 3 blocks to the diner. The air was thin and cold, my breath fogging in front of me as I moved through the quiet streets of town. After yesterday's confrontation, the routine felt like a kind of salvation, something steady I could hold on to. I'd spent the morning going over my paperwork again, bank statements, confirmation numbers, checking everything twice like a general preparing for battle. The bell above the diner door chimed as I stepped inside. Coffee steam, sizzling bacon, and the low murmur of early regulars wrapped around me like a familiar coat. I slid into my usual corner booth, the vinyl seat creaking beneath me. "Clark Miller." "Well, I'll be damned." The voice pulled me from my thoughts. Bob Harrison stood up from a nearby table, folding his newspaper under one arm. We'd worked together for 15 years at First National. He handled commercial loans, I took care of personal accounts. We weren't best friends, but we'd shared enough stale coffee and Monday morning complaints to consider each other trusted allies. "Bob," I said, standing to shake his hand. "Good to see you." "Mind if I join?" he asked, sliding into the booth before I could answer. "Haven't seen you since Martha's service. Heard you moved out to Pine Lodge. Everything all right?" The waitress appeared with coffee, hot, black, just how I used to order it before switching to decaf. I used the moment to think, how much did I want to share? Bob was decent, no doubt about that, but he was also a banker. There were boundaries. "Family situation," I said finally. "Needed some space to think things through." Bob gave a slow nod, studying me carefully. Then he said something that made the air feel suddenly thinner. "That son-in-law of yours tried to pull a fast one on us a few months back." My hand stopped halfway to my lips. "What kind of fast one?" Bob's expression hardened. "Came in asking for a home equity loan, 50 grand. Claimed it was his property. Had paperwork and everything. Said he owned the house." I blinked. "My house?" "That's right," Bob said grimly. "At first glance, it looked legit. But once we ran the title search, everything came back to you. Clean title. No co-signers, no claims, nothing that would give him any right to that house." I set the cup down carefully, heart thudding now, not from caffeine, but the weight of betrayal. "When was this?" "December, maybe January," Bob said. "I handled the application myself because of the amount involved. Clark," he leaned in, voice lowering, "this wasn't some misunderstanding. The documents he brought were forged. This was calculated." The words hit like ice water. 3 months ago, long before our blow-up, before the beer, the shouting, the walkout, Harry had already been plotting. This wasn't some desperate act born of conflict. It was premeditated. He had tried to steal from me before anything went wrong. I stared into my coffee, the bitter scent turning sour in my nostrils. "Did you report it?" Bob shook his head. "We rejected the application, flagged him in the system. Legally, it's a gray area since no money changed hands. But I kept copies. Everything he gave us." He paused. "You really didn't know?" I shook my head slowly, and as I did, a dozen memories came rushing back. Harry at the dinner table, moaning about bills and bad luck. His casual jokes about refinancing. His smug tone when he talked about protecting the family assets. All while I paid the mortgage. All while he was planning to rob me blind. "What was he going to use the money for?" I asked. Bob glanced around the diner, voice lowering as he leaned in. "According to the loan application, home improvements. But word around town says Harry's got gambling debts. Pretty substantial ones." My pulse quickened. "How substantial?" Bob scratched his chin, hesitant. "Jim Morrison might know more. You remember Detective Morrison? He mentioned something a while back. Harry's a regular at Glacier Peaks Casino." I remembered Jim Morrison well. We'd served together on the church's building committee, and his daughter had graduated high school with Tiffany. If he said Harry had a gambling problem, it wasn't just a rumor, it was fact. "Bob, I appreciate you telling me this," I said, sliding a few bills under my untouched coffee cup. As I stood to leave, Bob's voice stopped me. "Clark, be careful. A man willing to forge documents to steal from his own family?" He shook his head grimly. "He might do worse when he's cornered." I walked back to Pine Lodge with my thoughts in overdrive. Harry's belligerence, his sudden demand for beer, his constant disrespect. It all snapped into focus. He hadn't seen me as a father-in-law or a person. I was a wallet, a lifeline, a mark. The ultimatum hadn't been about pride or territory. It had been about keeping his access to the money flowing. Back in my motel room, I opened my laptop and created a new document. File name, Harry Thompson. Evidence. Bob's revelation was just the first crack in the dam. If Harry had forged loan documents, what else had he lied about? I checked the time, 4 p.m. The courthouse closed at 5:00. I had 1 hour to take the first official step toward reclaiming my life. The Flathead County Courthouse was a towering brick building that used to intimidate me as a young man, but today it felt like an ally. I headed straight to the clerk's office on the second floor. A woman in her 50s, behind the counter, efficient and calm, processing my paperwork with the kind of professionalism that made me feel strangely reassured. "Mr. Miller," she said, reviewing the documents. "This is your daughter's residence?" I handed over the property deed. "It's my house," I said firmly. "The residents have violated the terms of their occupancy." "And those terms would be?" I'd prepared for this. A verbal agreement requiring mutual respect and contribution to household expenses. Both conditions have been repeatedly breached. She gave a small nod and stamped the eviction notice with crisp finality. 30-day notice period starts today, she said. If they contest it, we'll schedule a hearing. If not, the sheriff serves final papers once the deadline passes. How soon will they receive the notice? Sheriff's Department usually handles service within 48 hours. I thanked her and gathered my copies, feeling the weight of something shifted me, like a foundation resetting. No more financial manipulation. No more emotional blackmail. Everything from here on would go through proper channels. Next stop, the police station. Detective Jim Morrison's office was a cramped back room, cluttered with filing cabinets and coffee-stained paperwork. He looked older, more gray in the beard, deeper lines around the eyes, but his handshake was as solid as ever. "Clark," he said, "what brings you to my corner of the world?" "Information," I said. "Bob Harrison told me you might know something about Harry Thompson's gambling." Jim's expression shifted instantly, friendly to professional. "Your son-in-law? What's going on?" I laid it out. The ultimatum that forced me out, the forged loan documents, the whispered rumors of casino debts. Jim listened intently, jotting notes now and then, but never interrupting. When I finished, he sat back and exhaled through his nose. "Harry's definitely known at Glacier Peaks," he said. "Let's just say they don't mistake him for a tourist." "Regular player, usually at the poker tables," Jim said. "Staff at Glacier Peaks mentioned he's been showing up more lately, playing higher stakes." "Any idea how much he owes?" I asked. Jim sighed, his pen tapping against a dog-eared folder. "Different creditors, different amounts. A few legit lenders, and a few that fall into the you don't want to owe them money category. We've fielded some collection calls, not criminal yet, but he's skating close. My estimate? 18 to 20 grand. The number hit me like a brick. Harry had been living in my house, eating my food, demanding my respect, while quietly burning through the kind of money that could have bought him a decent used car or put Tiffany through grad school. "Who are these creditors?" I asked. Jim gave a tired shrug. "Mixed bag. The banks and credit unions are getting impatient. The others," he paused, choosing his words, "let's just say they don't involve law enforcement when they come to collect." "How long does he have?" "He's been stalling for about 6 weeks, Jim replied. "Most creditors give someone maybe 3 months before things escalate. Harry's running out of road, Clark." I walked out of the police station with a fuller, darker picture of who Harry Thompson really was. His gambling addiction explained a lot. The loan fraud, the attitude, the aggression. I hadn't just been a convenient wallet. I'd been his last lifeline. That evening, I sat in my motel room, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound as I reviewed what I'd accomplished in just one day. Eviction notice filed, gambling debts confirmed, fraudulent behavior documented, allies, Bob, Jim, quietly lining up behind me. I opened my laptop and added Jim's revelations to the Harry Thompson evidence document. In banking, pattern recognition had been my edge, and the pattern here was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just entitlement. This was desperation. This was danger. And desperate men do desperate things. Tomorrow, I would start calling Harry's creditors, not to bail him out, but to make sure they knew the truth. Harry had no legal claim to my property, no assets to his name, and no more protection from me. The truth I'd learned is always the best weapon. And in a small town like Kalispell, truth travels faster than gossip when you control the narrative. By Friday, I knew it was time to start doing just that. My first encounter came at the post office of all places. Mrs. Henderson, from the church mailing committee, intercepted me by the stamp machine, her purse dangling like a badge of authority. "Clark, dear," she began in that syrupy, sweet voice that always preceded a verbal ambush. I've been hearing troubling things about family matters. Everything all right? I smiled politely, choosing my words like a surgeon choosing scalpels. Tiffany and Harry asked me to move out, so I did. Sometimes kids need space to manage their own responsibilities. Her eyes widened like I'd announced a moon landing. They asked you to leave your own house? I shrugged. It seemed like the best solution for everyone. Mrs. Henderson wasn't done. She leaned in like a woman about to reveal state secrets. But didn't you pay for their wedding? Help with the down payment? I always did wonder how they afforded that house on Harry's salary. I gave her a knowing nod. No elaboration. Let the facts and the silence do the work. She'd repeat that nod to at least a dozen people by Sunday morning. My next stop was Miller's Hardware. I'd worked there part-time after retiring from the bank, and Tom Kowalski, the owner, looked up from his inventory logs with warm familiarity and a hint of concern. "Clark," he said, putting down his clipboard, "heard there's some drama at home. You doing okay?" This time I didn't dodge the truth. Getting there, just taking steps to protect what's mine. Tom gave a small, approving nod. "Good, you've earned your peace, man. Don't let anyone take it from you." "Clark," Tom said as I stepped behind the counter at Miller's Hardware, "heard you've been staying out at Pine Lodge. Everything all right?" 3 other employees, Dave, Sarah, and Megan, gathered around, curiosity giving way to concern. I explained the situation plainly, how I'd been supporting my daughter and son-in-law for years, only to be told I wasn't welcome in my own home unless I followed Harry's rules. Their reactions were immediate and unanimous. "You paid for their college?" Dave, the assistant manager, shook his head in disbelief. "Harry always said his family was loaded, said they were helping you with the mortgage." I kept my voice calm. "Harry said a lot of things that weren't true." Tom's jaw tightened. "That explains a lot. Always seemed to have cash on hand, but never once took an overtime shift. We offered him extra hours all the time," Dave added. "He always had some family commitment or other excuse." "Those commitments were probably at the casino," Sarah muttered from the paint counter. By the time I left the store, I knew the real story would spread through Kalispell faster than wildfire. Small towns don't need formal news channels. Just one conversation at the hardware store, and everyone knows by dinner. My next stop was St. Mark's Lutheran Church. Pastor Williams was in his office, fine-tuning the bulletin for Sunday service. He offered me coffee and a seat, the same old chair that had seen decades of weary souls and quiet confessions. "Clark," he said gently, "several people have reached out. They're concerned. Can you help me understand what's happening?" There was no judgment in his voice, no prying, just the calm steadiness of a man used to holding other people's burdens. "Pastor," I said, "I've been financially supporting Tiffany and Harry for 5 years. Last weekend, they made it clear I was only welcome in the house if I followed Harry's rules. I chose to leave." He studied me a moment, his expression somber. "That must have been incredibly painful." I nodded. It was, but also clarifying. "I love my daughter, but I won't be treated like a servant in my own home." Pastor Williams leaned forward, resting his hands on his desk. "Sometimes loving someone means allowing them to face the consequences of their choices. It sounds like you've been shielding them from that for a long time." "Too long," I said quietly. On my walk back to the motel, I stopped at Annie's coffee shop, a familiar spot filled with a Friday afternoon crowd, retirees trading stories, off-duty workers getting their caffeine fix, young mothers corralling toddlers with chocolate chip muffins. I found a small table in the corner, sipped my coffee, and listened. "Heard Harry owes money all over town. Clark Miller's been footing their bills for years. Always wondered how they live so well on Harry's salary." The town was already adjusting its understanding of the truth. Kalispell wasn't big, but it was smart. Like a living organism, it processed information quickly, filtering out the lies and spotlighting the facts. I didn't need to tell the whole story. I just had to speak clearly once. The town would do the rest. As I stepped out of Annie's, my phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor of 20 years. "Clark, I hope it's okay," I called. She said, "I just wanted you to know, there's been a lot of shouting at the house lately. Mostly Harry, but Tiffany too. Yesterday the police drove by twice." "Thank you for letting me know," I replied. I appreciate you keeping an eye on things. There was a pause, then her voice softened. Are you safe where you're staying? Do you need anything? Her words caught me off guard, not because they were dramatic, but because they were sincere. In that moment, I was reminded, family may falter, but community, real community, steps in when it matters most. I'm fine, thank you. Just taking things one day at a time. That evening, I sat alone in my motel room, the hum of the air conditioner barely covering the quiet weight of the day. I replayed the conversations in my mind. Tom's disbelief, Pastor Williams's compassion, the quiet concern in Mrs. Patterson's voice. The town was drawing its own conclusions, and they were doing it without me twisting any arms. I hadn't orchestrated a campaign. I didn't need to. People could recognize injustice when it was no longer hidden behind charm or excuses. Then my phone buzzed again. Unknown number, but the area code was familiar. I didn't answer, just let it roll to voicemail. A moment later, I played the message. This is Marcus Webb from Frontier Financial Services. We're trying to reach Harry Thompson regarding a past due account. Please call us at your earliest convenience. Of course. They were calling me because Harry had probably listed my address on his credit applications. My home, my name, more evidence of his lies, more proof he'd been planning, expecting me to carry his debts too. I deleted the voicemail and opened my laptop. Time to update the evidence file, one more entry in a growing list of small betrayals. And yet, part of me knew it wouldn't end there. Harry never did go down without a fight. Saturday morning began peacefully. I sat by the motel window, coffee in hand, reviewing old bank statements with a methodical calm. But the peace didn't last. My phone rang, first Tom from the hardware store, then Mrs. Henderson, then Pastor Williams. Each call brought the same unsettling message. Harry was making his rounds. Clark, Tom said, his voice tight with barely restrained anger. I think you need to know what he's saying. He came in an hour ago, loud as ever. Told everyone you abandoned them without warning. Claimed you promised to take care of them for life, then pulled the rug out of spite. Did he say anything else? Tom hesitated. Yeah, he's telling people you're having some kind of mental breakdown. Said Tiffany wouldn't let you control every decision in their lives, so you threw them out. He's painting you as unstable and heartless. I let that sink in. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was a full-blown counter-narrative. He also said there's a medical emergency, that they need money and you're refusing to help. I thanked Tom and hung up. My mind was already moving. If Harry was resorting to sympathy plays and character attacks, that meant something. The pressure from creditors was mounting. He was cornered and desperate. The final confirmation came less than an hour later. Mr. Miller? The voice on the phone was crisp. This is Detective Morrison. I wanted to give you a heads up. He paused. Harry Thompson came in this morning. Filed a complaint. Claims you're being manipulated by someone at the bank into making unsound financial decisions. He's alleging possible elder abuse. Elder abuse. That word hit like a cold slap. Complete nonsense, but I knew the game. He was trying to plant seeds, build an official record, no matter how baseless. Create a story where I wasn't capable, where I was the confused aging parent, and he, the concerned son-in-law. It wasn't just about image anymore. It was strategy. He was going legal. But if Harry thought he could rewrite history with a few desperate lies, he was about to learn how much truth I'd already documented. And I wasn't confused. I was ready. I told Detective Morrison we'd need medical documentation and witness statements, things Harry obviously couldn't provide. He thanked me for my time and assured me they were just doing due diligence. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. Tiffany's number. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Then I answered. Dad, please pick up. I know you're angry, but there are things you don't understand. Her voice was thick with tears, the kind that tug at your reflexes before your reason kicks in. I'm pregnant, Dad, and the stress from all this, it's making me sick. The doctor says if things don't calm down, I could lose the baby. That old familiar twist hit my gut again. The instinct to protect. The same instinct they'd learned to weaponize. But something about her tone, it was too perfect, too rehearsed, a script whispered to her by someone more manipulative. "Congratulations on the pregnancy, sweetheart," I said, keeping my tone even. "When did you find out?" "Last week, right before everything fell apart." She sniffled, her voice cracked just enough to be convincing. "Dad, I can't lose my baby because of money problems. You always said family comes first." I closed my eyes. Family does come first. That's why I spent $60,000 on your education. And another $25,000 on your wedding. There was a pause. "But what about now?" she pressed. "What about your grandchild?" The question hovered in the silence, a calculated move. If she really was pregnant, if there really was a crisis, I could be making a terrible mistake. But the timing, the urgency, it felt like a setup. "Tiffany, have you seen a doctor about these pregnancy complications?" Another pause. "I have an appointment next week." "Which doctor?" "Richards, at the women's clinic." I almost smiled at the slip. "I know Dr. Richards. Your mother saw her for years. I'll call her office to see how I can help with the medical expenses." "Dad, you don't need to call. If there's a genuine emergency involving my grandchild, I want to help. Dr. Richards will know how best to proceed." Her voice turned sharp, almost panicked. "You can't just call my doctor. That's private information." "You're right. She can call me directly to discuss payment options." Click. The call ended abruptly. An hour later, I was walking past the First National Bank when I saw Harry. He was outside on the sidewalk, leaning on the brick wall, talking loud enough to draw attention from the ATM line and a few people passing with groceries. "He's lost his mind," Harry said, his voice dripping with performative concern. "Won't listen to reason. I'm trying to protect my wife and our baby, but he's just spiraling." He locked eyes with me as I approached, but he didn't flinch. Of course he didn't. In Harry's world, volume is truth, and the louder he spoke, the more he believed he could rewrite the story. But he didn't know what I had, not just evidence, not just history. I had clarity, and I wasn't playing defense anymore. "Senile old man thinks everyone's trying to steal from him. Kicked his own pregnant daughter out over nothing." That's what I heard as I rounded the corner. Harry stood outside the bank, loud and animated, talking to anyone who'd listen. A small crowd had gathered, neighbors, acquaintances, curious passers-by. I walked toward them calmly. Faces began to turn, eyes widened as they recognized the man Harry was ranting about. Then Harry saw me. He spun around, color rising fast in his face. "There he is," he barked. "The man who abandoned his own family." "Hello, Harry." My voice was calm, even. "How's the gambling debt situation working out?" The words landed like a slap. The shift was immediate. Low murmurs rippled through the crowd as pieces began falling into place. "You're crazy," Harry sputtered. I don't know what you're talking about." $18,000, I said, looking around. "According to Detective Morrison, Glacier Peaks Casino, mostly poker tables." More murmurs, some raised eyebrows. One man pulled out his phone. "Amazing," I continued, "how much money someone can lose when they're not paying their own rent, or utilities, or food." Harry's face turned from red to something closer to purple. He stepped in, using his height like a threat. "You senile old bastard. You can't just—" "I can document every dollar I've spent supporting you for the past 5 years," I cut in. "Can you document where your paychecks went?" The crowd fell completely silent. People were watching now, not just listening, processing. Harry knew he'd lost control of the narrative. "Come on," he growled, shoving past a few people. "This isn't over, Clark." He stormed off, but the moment lingered. Several phones were out. The real story would be on social media before dinner. Back at the motel, I opened my laptop and began logging the day's events into my evidence file. Harry's campaign was failing. Not because I'd outplayed him, but because truth doesn't buckle under pressure. His accusations couldn't survive the light. But Tiffany's claim still worried me. If she really was pregnant, if there really was a medical risk, then my next move needed to be precise. I picked up the phone and called Dr. Richards' office. I wasn't asking for confidential details. I simply left my name and number, offering to cover any necessary medical costs if there was a confirmed complication. If there's a real emergency, I told the receptionist, I want to help, but I won't be manipulated. That night, around 9:30, there was a knock at my door. Steve Brennan, the night manager at Pine Lodge, stood there looking uneasy. Mr. Miller? That man who was yelling in the parking lot earlier, he came back about 20 minutes ago. I didn't speak. I just waited. Said some things, real angry, pacing near the office. Thought you should know. Harry wasn't backing down. He was escalating. And now I had cause for real concern. I reached for my phone. Detective Morrison, it's Clark Miller. We need to talk. What's going on? He confronted me in public today. Loud, aggressive, gestures, threats, witnesses everywhere. And now he's showing up after dark. I looked out the motel window toward the dim line of Main Street, the calm of small-town night. I'd like to file a formal complaint and explore protection options. Come in tomorrow morning, Morrison said. Bring anything you've got. I agreed, but deep down, I knew I wouldn't be waiting until morning. Stood outside your door maybe 5 minutes, then left, Steve said. Made some guests nervous. Steve Brennan wasn't easily rattled. Retired Army sergeant, seen his fair share of chaos in places far worse than Pine Lodge. Did he say anything specific? I asked. Muttered something about teaching old fools lessons. He shook his head. I've got it on security video if you need it. Security footage, a digital record, proof of Harry's intimidation tactics on private property. Steve, would you be willing to share that footage with the police? Absolutely. Guy like that shouldn't be stalking or threatening elderly residents. The next morning, I walked into the police station. In my hand, a written timeline detailing Harry's escalating behavior, a USB drive containing the motel's surveillance footage. Detective James Morrison sat down across from me and reviewed the material with quiet precision. His professionalism was surgical. Each fact processed, each point cross-referenced. When he finally looked up, his expression told me everything. Clark, this shows a clear pattern of intimidation, he said. Combined with what I witnessed at the bank, we have strong grounds for a restraining order. What would that involve? A court order prohibiting Harry from coming within 500 feet of you or your property. If he violates it, he's arrested. No questions asked. Jim leaned back slightly in his chair. Then his tone changed. There's something else you should know. He pulled a file from his desk drawer and opened it slowly. Harry met with a lawyer last Friday, asked about adverse possession laws. The phrase hit like cold water. Squatters' rights? Exactly. He was researching whether he could claim legal ownership of your house based on living there continuously. I felt the breath catch in my throat. Jim nodded, unfretted. Montana law requires 5 years of hostile occupation to file a claim. He's been there 3. So he was planning to wait 2 more, then steal my house. Jim didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was in the file. In Harry's quiet, calculated moves. This wasn't freeloading. This was premeditated theft. A legal ambush years in the making. Does he have any legitimate claim? I asked. None. Jim's voice was firm. Adverse possession only applies if someone occupies the property without permission. You gave them permission. He's never paid rent, never paid taxes. That alone kills any claim. Jim tapped the folder. But what he does have is a paper trail that shows planning. A slow, deliberate scheme. It's damning. I stared at the table. All this time, I thought Harry was just lazy, entitled, manipulative. But he'd been playing a long game. One that would have ended with my family home in his name, through nothing but time and technicalities. What about the restraining order? I asked. I'll fast-track it. With this footage and your documentation, the judge will sign it today. You'll have it by this afternoon. I nodded, but inside a different fire had started. Harry thought he could weaponize family. Use law like a crowbar, twist kindness into leverage. Turn my house into his victory prize. But not anymore. The rules had changed. Now there were witnesses, paper trails, evidence, and for the first time in a long while, he was playing defense. I left the police station with a clearer picture of Harry Thompson than ever before. That beer he slammed down on my table 6 months ago? It hadn't been about asserting dominance. It had been about securing a disguise, one meant to last just long enough to steal my home out from under me. As I stepped out into the sunlight, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and scrolled through my contacts. It was time for some strategic disruption. First call, Marcus Webb, Frontier Financial Services. One of Harry's creditors. He'd left 3 voicemails just this week. "Mr. Webb," I said when he answered, "I'm returning your call about Harry Thompson. Just so we're clear, he no longer lives at my address and has no legal claim to my property." There was a pause, then paper shuffling on the other end. "But he listed that as his residence on all applications." "Then he lied," I said. "He was a guest. I evicted him last week." "Where can he be reached?" "Mountain View Auto Dealership, Highway 93. Click. Second call, Continental Credit Recovery. "This is Clark Miller. You've been contacting me about Harry Thompson. Just to clarify, he has no ownership in my property and does not live here." No explanations, no emotional appeals, just facts. I made 6 calls by noon, every one of them chipping away at the foundation Harry had built, every one of them cutting off an escape route. By the time I hung up the last call, his carefully spun web of false addresses, deferred payments, and dodged accountability was unraveling. That afternoon, I returned to the police station. Judge Morrison's signature was still wet when the clerk handed me the paperwork. Restraining order granted. Harry Thompson was now legally barred from coming within 500 feet of me or my property. Violation meant arrest on site. No more gray areas. No more posturing. I drove back to Pine Lodge with one feeling in my chest. Satisfaction. The quiet kind. The kind that comes not from revenge, but from justice finally catching up. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "This isn't over, old man." I didn't flinch. I just forwarded the message to Detective Morrison. Documentation, evidence, pattern of behavior. It was muscle memory now. Block number, add to file, Monday morning. I walked into the county clerk's office and filed the finalized restraining order. The woman at the desk stamped it with crisp precision. "Mr. Miller," she said, handing it back, "this order is effective immediately. Any contact or physical approach constitutes a violation." "Thank you," I said, tucking it into my folder. "The sheriff's office will serve him?" "They'll have it delivered today." I stepped outside, sun high and sharp in the Montana sky. My phone rang before I even reached the car. "Clark, this is Mike Brennan, Mountain View Auto." There was tension in his voice, professional but strained. "Something happened with Harry. You're going to want to hear this." Mike Brennan was one of the good ones. A straight shooter, owner of Mountain View Auto, and a man who'd built his dealership not on gimmicks, but on trust and word of mouth. "Clark," he said as soon as I picked up, "I need to ask you something directly." "Go ahead." "Are the things Harry's been saying about you true?" "What's he been saying?" "That you had some kind of breakdown? That you threw him out because of dementia? Said there was a family medical emergency you're refusing to help with?" His voice was calm, but laced with suspicion. "Thing is, Clark, I've known you 20 years. You co-signed my son's first car loan when no one else would. That doesn't sound like the man you are." I let out a breath. The lies were spreading faster than I thought. "Mike," I said evenly, "there's no emergency, no mental decline. What there was an ultimatum. Obey Harry's demands or leave my own home. I chose to leave. You've got people who can back that up. My banker, my lawyer, and the detective who just filed my restraining order." There was a long pause, just the sound of a man recalibrating his trust. "I was afraid of that," he finally said. "Clark, I had 3 customers today mention Harry. One says he owes her brother money. Another saw him at Glacier Peaks Casino. This is bleeding into my showroom." "I understand," I said. "I can't have this, not around people who trust us with major purchases. I'm going to have to let him go." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "You're doing the right thing." 20 minutes later, I was sipping coffee at Annie's Diner, letting the warmth of the cup soothe a tired ache behind my ribs. when I saw the first debt collector pull up in front of the house I used to call home. Continental Credit Recovery, according to the magnetic door sign. I recognized the name. They were one of the firms I'd spoken with last Friday. Harry's fantasy of control was dissolving right there on the lawn. Then my phone rang. Tiffany. Dad? Her voice came in sharp and shaken. There are men at the house asking about Harry's debts. They're talking about our assets, our income, everything. What did you tell them? I told them the truth, that Harry doesn't own your house and he doesn't live here anymore, but they're saying something about garnishing wages, seizing assets. Dad, I don't understand any of this. I kept my voice calm for her sake. Sweetheart, that's what happens when someone borrows money they can't repay. These are consequences Harry created, not you. He owes $18,000, Dad. How is that even possible? So she really hadn't known. Not the scope, not the casino, not the late-night lies. Gambling debts, I said softly. Glacier Peaks Casino. Detective Morrison confirmed it. Silence. Then quietly, like a child catching her breath in a dark room. He told me he was working overtime. He said he was trying to save up for a surprise. I'm sorry you're learning it this way, Tiffany. I meant it. But truth is, deception doesn't stay buried forever. It always finds the surface. And the sheriff's deputy was here too, she added, her voice brittle. Served Harry some kind of papers. He's been ranting and throwing things ever since. The restraining order. Of course, Harry was only just now realizing what it meant. To be legally erased from the home he tried to steal. Dad, she said, her voice cracking. He's talking about leaving town. Says there's nothing left here for him. There wasn't, not anymore. What am I supposed to do? Tiffany's voice trembled with the weight of it. Make decisions based on who Harry really is, I said evenly. Not who you hoped he was. That evening, I parked across the street from what used to be my home and watched the unraveling unfold in real time. 3 different creditor vehicles had come and gone over the course of the day. The house, once peaceful, once safe, was now the epicenter of a slow-motion implosion. Mrs. Patterson next door gave me a sad wave from her porch. She'd lived beside us for nearly 2 decades. She knew what a quiet disaster looked like. And this was no longer quiet. Through the living room window, I could see Harry and Tiffany mid-argument. His body language, erratic, agitated, cornered. Hers, defensive, cautious, afraid. The fairy tale was fracturing. That marriage built on my financial foundation and his false promises was crumbling as the real world forced its way inside. My phone buzzed. Steve, Pine Lodge. That guy tried to get in the building again. Told him about the restraining order. He left, but he was really angry. I forwarded the message straight to Detective Morrison. Harry had violated the restraining order within hours of being served. Desperation was making him reckless. And recklessness, I knew, often walked hand in hand with danger, but it also made him predictable. A man like Harry with gambling debts, mounting legal trouble, and a house of lies collapsing around him had only 2 options. Face his consequences like a man, or run like the coward I now knew him to be. My money was on the second. As I drove back to Pine Lodge, a different question circled in my mind. What would Tiffany do? Would she pack a bag, chase him across state lines, clinging to the fantasy she once married? Or would she finally look at the man beside her and realize he was never who she thought? Either way, it was out of my hands. I'd spent 5 years shielding them both from the weight of real-world accountability. That shield shattered the day they asked me to choose between my dignity and their demands. I chose dignity. Now they could choose whatever came next. 2 days of watching chaos from a distance was enough. Wednesday morning, I made the call. Tiffany, meet me at the diner, just you. I can't leave Harry alone right now, Dad. He's really struggling with everything that's happening. Then we have nothing to discuss. The restraining order means I can't be around him. And I won't pretend he doesn't deserve that boundary. A long pause, then, where do you want to meet? Main Street Diner, 2 o'clock, back corner booth where we can talk privately. I arrived early, chose the booth with my back to the street, not because I was hiding, but because I'd already seen all I needed to see out there. What came next wasn't about surveillance, it was about clarity. It was time Tiffany saw it too. I chose a booth tucked in the back, away from windows, away from distractions. I wanted this conversation to focus on words, not worried glances at passing cars or echoes of the past. When Tiffany walked in, she looked older than her 28 years. Stress had carved fine lines around her eyes. She fidgeted with the strap of her purse as if trying to hold herself together. She slid into the seat across from me and didn't wait. "Dad, I know you're angry, but Harry's lost his job. Debt collectors won't leave us alone. The phone rings constantly. People are showing up at the door demanding money we don't have." I let her finish. Then I folded my hands, kept my voice even. "I'm offering you one chance to end this with some dignity, Tiffany." Her brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Public acknowledgement of the truth, full disclosure of how much I've supported you both, and an honest explanation of why I left." Her face flushed a deep red. "You want me to humiliate myself in front of the whole town?" "No, I want you to tell the truth. There's a difference," she swallowed hard. "What kind of acknowledgement?" I'd spent 2 full days outlining exactly what justice would look like. Church announcement during testimony time, letter to the editor of the Tribune, Facebook post, visible to all our mutual friends. Everything. The college tuition, the wedding I paid for, the mortgage I covered, and the ultimatum that drove me out. Tiffany blinked back tears. "Dad, people will think. They'll think you had a father who loved you enough to sacrifice his retirement for your happiness, and that you took it for granted until it was gone." She stared down at her coffee. It had gone cold. She hadn't touched it. "What about Harry?" "Harry is no longer part of any equation involving me. The restraining order is permanent. If you stay married to him, that's your decision. But it means choosing him over any future relationship with me." "You're asking me to choose between my husband and my father." "No, I'm asking you to choose between a man who threatened me and the man who raised you." I let that hang in the air. The fact that you see those as equivalent tells me everything about how far we've drifted apart. She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she asked, "What about the house? It's been in our family for generations." "It's going to the Montana Veterans Housing Initiative. 3 families, veterans and their children, will live there. People who understand what service and sacrifice actually mean." The words hit her like a slap. She flinched. "The will's already changed, witnessed, signed, filed with my attorney." I kept my voice gentle but firm. "Even if you do everything I've asked perfectly, the house won't come back to you. That decision is final." Her eyes searched mine, pleading. "Why?" "Because I need to know that any reconciliation between us is based on love, not inheritance expectations. For 5 years, you treated me like a convenient funding source," I said quietly. "I want to see if there's anything left between us besides financial dependency." Tiffany's eyes welled up. Tears, real ones this time. Not the guilt-laced theatrics I'd seen too often. Just raw grief, unvarnished and trembling. "I'm sorry, Dad, I really am. I never meant for things to go this far." I shook my head. "Sorry isn't enough anymore, sweetheart. The whole town watched you and Harry treat me like a servant in my own home. They watched you choose his demands over my dignity." I leaned in, my voice still calm, but edged with truth. "Words are just words now. I need to see actions." She clutched her napkin like a lifeline. "What if I can't do it? What if I can't stand up in front of everyone and admit how wrong we were?" "Then you'll live with the consequences of that choice." I let the silence stretch, let the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. "Harry will probably leave town to escape his creditors. Men like him always run when things get hard. You can go with him and start over somewhere else, or you can stay here and try to rebuild your life with honesty." She looked down, voice barely above a whisper. "And if I do what you're asking, then maybe over time, we can build a real relationship, not based on money, not on guilt or obligation, but on mutual respect between 2 adults." Tiffany nodded slowly, wiping her eyes with the edge of her sleeve, the napkin now a crumpled mess in her lap. "How long do I have?" Sunday morning, church starts at 10. If you're not there to tell the truth, I'll know you have made your choice. She stood, slower this time, shoulders slumped. Not from defiance, but from the weight of reckoning. She looked small again, fragile, uncertain. Dad, do you think you could ever forgive me? I looked at her, really looked, and for a moment I saw the child she used to be, the one who braided dandelions into crowns, the one who insisted bedtime stories always end with a brave princess. Forgiveness and trust aren't the same, Tiffany. I forgave you the day I walked away instead of fighting. But trust, that has to be earned, one honest action at a time. She nodded without speaking, then turned and walked toward the door, bearing the weight of a choice that would shape the rest of her life. I stayed in the booth watching her drive away. Sunday was 4 days away. By then, I'd know if my daughter had the courage to choose truth over comfort, responsibility over loyalty to someone who never deserved it. Sunday morning arrived clear and cold. I pulled into the church parking lot under a steel gray sky and stepped into the sanctuary. It was fuller than usual. Word had spread. A quiet buzz of anticipation hung in the air. Some folks whispered. Some just stared ahead, waiting. I took my regular pew, third row from the front, aisle seat, folded my hands, and waited. Would you like the next section to describe Tiffany's decision and how the town responds? Or would you prefer a parallel scene showing what Harry is doing at that same moment? Pastor Williams began the service with familiar hymns and scripture readings, but the sanctuary held an energy I hadn't felt in years. Quiet, tense, expectant. When testimony time came, Tiffany rose from the back row. She looked small walking down the center aisle, shoulders hunched, hands clasped tightly, but her steps were steady, determined. At the podium, she gripped both edges like a lifeline and scanned the faces of people she'd known her entire life. Her voice was soft at first, but clear. I need to tell you something important about my father. A hush fell over the sanctuary. Even the children stilled. For the past 5 years, Clark Miller has been supporting my husband and me financially. He paid $160,000 for my college education. When I could have gone to a state school, he paid $25,000 for my wedding because Harry's family couldn't afford their share. Murmurs rippled through the pews. These weren't just vague regrets. They were receipts, truth with a price tag. He gave us his family home, the house his parents left him, where he lived with my mother for 20 years. When we couldn't make mortgage payments, he paid them. When we needed groceries, utilities, car insurance, he paid for everything while living off Social Security. Her voice grew stronger, steadier, word by word. 3 weeks ago, when my father refused to take orders from my husband like a servant, we gave him an ultimatum. Obey Harry or leave his own house. Dad chose to leave, not because he didn't love me, but because he refused to surrender his dignity. Silence wrapped the sanctuary. Not stunned, not hostile, just reverent. Even the children felt it. I stood by and watched my husband disrespect the man who gave up his retirement for our comfort. I chose loyalty to someone who threatened my father, over loyalty to the man who raised me with patience and love. Tears streamed freely now, but her voice held. I'm standing here because my father offered me one last chance to choose truth over pride. We were wrong. I was wrong. My father deserved gratitude and respect, and instead we gave him ultimatums and demands. She turned, locking eyes with me across the pews. Dad, I know sorry isn't enough for what we put you through, but I'm hoping, just hoping, it's a start. She stepped down and the sanctuary stirred as if everyone had held their breath together. Supportive murmurs rose, a few quiet amens, even some tears. Pastor Williams returned to the podium, voice thick with emotion. Sometimes the hardest kind of courage is the courage to admit we were wrong. Tiffany has shown that courage today, and Clark Miller has shown us all what dignity looks like under pressure. After the service, people approached me with embraces, handshakes, and quiet words of support. Mrs. Henderson squeezed my hand. We all suspected you were helping them, Clark. What we didn't know was how they repaid your kindness. Tom from the hardware store clapped my shoulder. That took real character, what you did. Setting boundaries with family, That's no small thing. But the most meaningful moment came outside the church, in the crisp Montana air, where Tiffany found me by the old oak tree. The letter to the Tribune runs Wednesday, she said. The Facebook post goes up tonight. She hesitated. Harry left town yesterday, packed his truck while I was at work. No note, no forwarding address, just gone. I nodded, not surprised. Men like Harry always ran when the consequences caught up. I'm sorry your marriage ended this way, I said gently. I'm not, she replied, quieter this time. I filed for divorce this morning. Turns out he was gambling with my credit cards behind my back. The debts are worse than we thought. She didn't cry. Not this time. And that told me more than tears ever could. 3 months later, I stood in the front yard of my former family home, watching 3 veteran families carry boxes and strollers and folded flags into the newly renovated transitional housing units. The Montana Veterans Housing Initiative had turned the place into 3 private apartments, each family with their own space, while sharing a common kitchen, garden, and community room. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, fresh from deployment, called to her 2 kids as they ran toward the new playground, donated by local businesses. She approached me with a wide smile. Mr. Miller, this opportunity means everything. Thank you for choosing veterans for this gift. Veterans understand sacrifice, I said simply. This house should serve people who've actually earned it. My own life had settled into quiet routines at the lakeside cabin I bought with the money no longer vanishing into other people's choices. Morning coffee on the deck, watching the mist lift off Flathead Lake. Afternoon fishing trips that ended whether I caught anything or not. Evenings with a book, no noise, no drama, no demands. The cabin was small, 2 bedrooms, a sturdy little kitchen, and a dock where I could launch my fishing boat. Simple, honest, enough. My phone buzzed. A text from Tiffany, made my second payment on the divorce attorney, started a part-time job at the clinic. It's not much, but it's mine. Thank you for giving me space to change without closing the door. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Keep going. Trust takes time, but you're headed the right direction. I set the phone down, picked up my coffee, and listened to the wind rustling through the pines. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting on anyone, and it felt like freedom.